Before you enjoy this video, let me first talk about our sponsor for this video and the entire Medal of Honor series. Our sponsor is Kimages, a veteran-owned photoshopping and custom gift-making business. I actually served with the owner in the 10th Mountain Division, and I can say that the quality of their products is by far some of the best I've seen. In fact, the shirt that I'm wearing in the video was made by Kimages. I'll put more information on how to contact Kimages in the description, and you can find them on Facebook using the name Kimages that you can find in the description or on this picture here. Thank you and enjoy the video. We're here now at Lieutenant Orville, Emil, believe it or not, just like the last gentleman, no relation whatsoever, Bloch. Now, his kids are here today. If you'll please raise your hands and let them see who you are. They can actually talk a lot more about their dad, so I'm going to keep my comments very, very brief, because apparently they knew him better than I did. But he was a guy who was once deemed too short for service, who found a way into the officer corps, who found a way to make his life in the Army, be the nomadic Army lifestyle. But the story I remember the most, and I don't want to spoil too much of what the Bloch children might say, is he did some incredible things in Italy. Basically assaulted multiple German machine gun positions with him and a buddy or two. And the story that sticks with me about that is, as incredible as that was, that he lived, is what his son David told me. He said, "Dad, what did you do after all that?" He said, "I sat down and chain smoked for about 15 minutes. And that shows
45.
you, say again?
45
minutes. And that shows you how stressful that was for them, but how important they knew that mission was. There is no way to tell how many lives his actions saved. But it's safe to know that his actions allowed his unit to move forward. And the lives of some of those men definitely are owed to Lieutenant Bloch and his buddy. So without further ado, I want to introduce the Orville Bloch children. So if you'll please come up this way and have the time to talk about your dad.
There you go.
I didn't spoil that for you. That's why I'm letting you do it.
You're going to let me do it.
You're going to do what?
Just like to start with introductions. I'm David Bloch, the youngest, and this is my brother Stacy, and he's 3 years older.
And then there's a generation gap.
And then we have a generation gap.
And I am Ray, the oldest.
And I'm Robin, the number one son of the three. So who would like to start?
Well, should we start with Ray, since Ray and Rob, since you guys had more of a childhood and being raised in the military atmosphere with Dad?
Let me say a couple things. First of all, please, if I'm not hitting on some things that you would like to hear, please ask questions. But you mentioned that he did this action with a buddy. The 3 daughters of that buddy are here with us today.
Come on up, please.
Please.
I want to at least introduce you to the camera, please.
If you weren't going to do it, I was going to do that. So, way to go.
I wanted to start with that.
These are the daughters of Paul McNeilis. And David and I got to take Paul out to dinner once and met the middle daughter. And man, it was a wonderful time because, you know, these guys don't talk about the war much. And we lost Dad when he was 68, and he never really started to open up a lot to us. We learned an awful lot about our dad from their dad, and it was quite an afternoon. Yeah, an amazing guy, and he was the platoon runner. That didn't he run some of the prisoners back down and
Yes.
then headed back up that hill? If you ever see pictures of that hill in Italy, you know, they just made a bet that the Germans didn't put a guard at the top of this cliff-like area, and they were lucky that they were able to get up there and kind of flank their forces and proceed nest by nest to clear that hill. But yeah, their dad was an awesome guy, and yeah, was with him. So we've got this bond with that family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll just start with a couple background pieces that I think are of interest today about my father. He was, his mother died when she was 27 years old in 1919 during the 1918-19 pandemic of the flu at that time. He was 3 years old. His mother's sister took him in because his father couldn't, those days, couldn't take in young children. He had to go find another wife eventually, etc. So that woman raised him along with 2 sons. So she lost both of her sons, were killed in World War II. So she had these boys, one got the Medal of Honor, and her other 2 sons were killed. So she was, it's remarkable in that regard. He is descended from Ukrainian immigrants. They both immigrated from the Ukraine, and so that's of interest today. So he grew up a fairly hard-scrabble life. After and it was mentioned he was too short for officer's commission, but he worked his way up to lieutenant anyway before the war. After the action, he was sent home a number of months later when he was awarded the medal. And first they sent him first to his hometown, where there was a parade in his honor that ended up at the high school where my mother was acting principal at the time because all the men were out fighting. And she says they made her principal because she had the best handwriting for setting numbers. I think there was more to it than that. But, so the parade ended at the high school, and Mom, as principal of the high school, was in the reception line. And that is how my mother and father met, which I think is an interesting story. So they got married, obviously, shortly thereafter. And the first thing I remember was that my father then was assigned to the occupying forces in Japan. And he worked in the Daiichi building with General MacArthur. And he was there. I have a couple memories of Japan. One was in a Jeep. My dad acquired a Jeep with the Jeeps with no doors. And I was like standing on the seat, because of course it wasn't very big then, standing on the seat, and all these little Japanese children were running around because they were, so interested in looking. And I remember that. And I remember the beautiful swing sets at Fuji. The colors were amazing, those little wood. And those are my 2 memories, my memories of his time in Japan. We then had to leave because the Korean War broke out, and my father went to Korea with General MacArthur, and Mom and I had to come home. And he was one of the first of a string of absences because of his service. But we stayed with relatives, both on the west coast in Oakland, in fact, and then later in North Dakota until my father was able to come back. He then was sent to Kansas, I believe, and that is where
I was born.
Robin was
Fort
born.
Leavenworth.
Fort
Ah.
Leavenworth.
I think he was attending the Command and General Staff College.
Very good, thank you. And he was instrumental in writing the Follow Me instructions for. And then what I remember, he remembered then going on from Kansas and Georgia to Panama. That was the most remarkable. That was where Army base in the Canal Center. We lived in Quarry Heights, which was the nerve and command center for all the USA intelligence and action for all of Central and South America. That was the nerve center. And Quarry Heights was named because it was up against a rock quarry, and there was this huge tunnel dug into this solid rock-faced wall that went in and up and in and up. And whenever we had drills, as a child, I remember going into the tunnel. I visited this place. I lived there longer than I lived anywhere else at one time. So I had fond memories, visited it as an adult about 11 years ago. And I asked the guard by the entrance of the tunnel, which was right by the house that we lived in all those years, about the tunnel. And of course they denied tunnel. There's no tunnel. Because it now houses all the Panamanian stuff, documents and records that are highly sensitive and all that sort of thing. While we were there, he did go on several excursions, actions. One was 1954 in Guatemala, and then after that we came back, and he was regular Army advisor to the Washington State and Oregon State National Guard, and he was housed in the old armory that was taken over later during the Seattle World's Fair, but that's where he was housed. And we lived in Richmond Beach for several years. Please add something if I'm forgetting something. Yes, for dinner, thank you. In 1957, Audie Murphy came to dinner at our house. Audie came up from Hollywood. He was out for something, and of course, because they were both Medal of Honor winners, they were good friends, and Dad invited him to dinner. My mom was just like, oh my God, Audie Murphy's coming, what am I going to do? And I was like, what's the big deal? This is, I don't even know who he was, but I do remember it. It was quite an event when Audie Murphy came to dinner in 1957. When we were in Panama, he was very good friends with Ernest Childers, another Medal of Honor recipient. He was a Creek Indian descent, and he and his wife Yolanda would be at the house frequently. I do remember that. So then moving on through Richmond Beach, then my father was assigned to Bangkok, and I remember going through all the shots. We sold our house, we sold our car, we were all ready to go. We got a tropical wardrobe, and my mother discovered she was expecting this brother.
I blew it for everybody.
And so he was gone for 20 months. My brother you were a year and a half or something when my father first saw this guy. And he was gone on his own, and he was involved in some interesting action upriver during that time. That is now common knowledge. I mean, it's now just declassified, so I can say it. It wasn't at the time. When he came back, we then we were living in Chelan, Washington, because we'd sold our house, sold our car, and so quickly Dad, when he was coming, Dad's sister was there, so they found this little shack of a house across the street from an apple packing shed and parked us there for 20 months while he was gone. And then he came back, and then he was assigned to the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And so we went as kids from Chelan, Washington, and living across the street in a little but I'll get to that. So then we moved from Washington, D.C. in '63. I remember it because it was 2 weeks before President Kennedy was assassinated. And by the way, while I was in Washington, D.C., I went with my dad to a reception because, as his date, so to speak, because this brother had just been born, and my mother could not go.
So what you're saying is your brothers ruined your life.
Yes.
To this day.
I really helped her on this one, actually, when you hear the story.
Yeah, because I went to this reception, it was in the Rose Garden, and I met President Kennedy and Prime Minister Nixon. So that was a highlight for me. And then we moved back to Seattle, and Dad was, by that time, they had thought he was going to be made a general, but along about that time when we moved back to Seattle, they found, I think it was actually in the routine physical, maybe that was required before getting the star, they found that he'd had a heart attack. And so he then was assigned to a place in Seattle on Pier 91, this great assignment where they just let him sort of finish out his time, but they assigned these wonderful sergeant majors that he worked with there. The only name I remember is Sergeant Major Harada.
Sergeant Peacock?
Yeah, Sergeant Peacock.
Oh, Sergeant Peacock. Do you remember any other names?
Those are the two.
Okay. And and he was out at Pier 91, and then he retired. Now, we have, after, in 1977, my husband and I were living in Nevada, and the city of San Jose hosted a Congressional Medal of Honor convention. And it was they really did an incredible job. And my father then was vice president of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, and General Jimmy Doolittle was president. And so my husband and I, and our daughter, who was then 6.5 years old, traveled to San Jose to spend this time at this convention with them. And we toured Marriott's Great America with General Doolittle. And the Marriott guys, the executives and stuff, were touring with us, and they were just like all over Jimmy Doolittle. I mean, it's just they were so impressed. General this, General that. But we got to the tidal wave, that big tidal wave, and the tidal wave is a big ride that goes way up like this, and then you're actually upside down, and then like that, and just flips you around like that. Jimmy Doolittle was quite small. I remember his frail then. He had a little cane. He had liver spots on his hand. And we get there, and they're, General, do you want to ride this? And I'm like, Sam, they're not going to put that little old man on that. He rode it. We were sitting behind him. And my little daughter, was just right behind him. And then we were right behind that on this car. And we went up and back again. When he got off, they said, General, how was it? How was it? And General Doolittle said, well, it was about 3 G's on the way up and 6 on the way down. Help me out, brothers.
Well, okay, David,
You're
do you
doing
want to
great.
jump in?
Oh,
Talk more about the man
yeah.
and the father.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He was an inspiration for all of us. A wonderful
got that,
dad. Okay, a wonderful father to me, being the oldest son, Stacy and David, either not here yet or very young. Dad would always take me to any of his projects he was working on. And one of my fondest memories was our 2 years in Maryland while he was at the Pentagon, when he would take me to Civil War battlefields, and especially a trip to Gettysburg. Just great memories of my dad as a father. I want to point out, Dad always said there were so many brave actions in the war done by men who never got any recognition, and that he was just fortunate that what he did, he was recognized for. He was doing his job. It was exemplary. There's no doubt about that, what he did. Dad was an infantryman. Paul McNellis was an infantryman. I don't have to tell you that the infantry is the point of the spear. They're eyeball to eyeball with the enemy. They see the worst that war has to offer. God bless those two men. And God bless the infantry.
Would you like to, or should I go now? Or?
Flip a coin.
Well, by the time we came along, Dad was older, and we were around when he ended his career in the military, and all I can say is I don't think there was ever a harder working guy on the planet. He just, his entire life was service and work and providing for his family, but most of my experience with him was working in the apple orchards and riding around. And he had this old Ford truck, those old Ford F-150s that have the white and the red paint job from the 60s. What, 300, 400,000 miles on that thing?
Yeah,
Just
300,000
drove it everywhere. But
yeah.
we'd go up into the hills behind Chelan where he, had an orchard. He loved to buy old houses, fix them up, flip them. But we'd go up in the hills, fill the back of that truck with rock to go to rockery with. Or, one of our favorite jokes is go out and haul brush. George W. Bush had nothing on Dad for wanting to haul brush. But yeah, it was our experience was different because there is a fair age gap between this set of kids and this set of kids.
How many years in between you?
Oh, there's 4.5 between my sister and I. I was born in '52. 8 years between me and Stacy, and 11 years between me and David.
Wow.
Yeah. And Ray.
And Ray was 15 and a half when I was born,
Yeah, almost
and
16.
she would take me on dates when she was a teenager, and she got some funny looks, and it was like, it's not what it really looks like.
Yeah. Oh, heck,
It's not your baby. Why does he look like you?
There's something you're not telling us.
Yeah, after Dad passed away, when we were at the funeral and things, somebody talked to the family about how he was down and out. And in Richmond Beach, there was this little fountain drugstore place. And Dad loved to just sit at these lunch counters and drink coffee and talk to people. And this guy didn't know who Dad was or anything, but they talked at this lunch counter. The guy was down and out. And Dad left, and when the guy got up to leave, and apparently Dad had slipped a $20 bill under this guy's plate. And it had such an effect on him that he showed up at Dad's funeral 20 years later.
And shared the story with us.
I mean, there's so much we don't
Yes.
know about him.
Right.
That even one of his commanding officers wrote a letter saying that he wished he'd talked to Dad more about another action where Dad went off to go up some hill where the Germans were at, and this general wrote a letter to the family saying that I never thought I'd see him alive again. And the next thing he knows, Dad's voice is coming over a radio saying that they cleared the place out. But he never, with the war going on, never got a chance to find out what happened. And neither did we. But, that's just sort of like Rob says. All these things nobody knows about that people did. So yeah, and thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Yeah,
Well, I'd like to, share some of my childhood experiences with my dad. And probably one of the first ones that I recall is when I was 4 years old, and my mom had gotten pretty ill with borderline cancer. Fortunately, it was not cancer, but she had to go to the hospital for a week and was, out for a week. Robin was in high school and Stacy was going to elementary school. I wasn't even in school yet. So guess what? He took me to work with him in 1967. And it's my only experience where I actually was going to the military locations and being with him in his office for a week. And what I recall of it is the sergeants were there, and the sergeants were, every couple hours the sergeants would say, "Colonel, should we put on another pot of coffee?" And that's my recollection of it. And that the days went on forever. I mean, it just dragged on. But I think we left early every day, like around probably 2 or so, because Robin and Stacy would be coming home from school. And that dad would then have to be home to deal with the other children. So, that strikes me as, that's dad taking his kid when his wife's in the hospital. I'm just so fortunate that I got to experience both a rural and a city upbringing between being in the orchards in Chelan and being here in Seattle as well in Richmond Beach. And I just got to meet he just really liked the orchardist guys over in Eastern Washington. And like Stacy was saying, he just really liked to sit at these counters and have coffee with these guys and interact with them. And even over here, he had a sweet tooth too. And back in the day, when Fred Meyer up in Shoreline, it was Value Mart way back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
They had this little ice cream area in the Value Mart. Oh, he loved to go there. And then he'd love to take us also to the bowling alley that it's now called Spin Alley, but it was Arden Lanes back then. He loved to go in there and have coffee and donuts. I mean, these are the memories I have of, and then he got his brother Ozzy out of the mines in Arizona and brought him up to Manson and got him established with a small meat cutting operation, and it had a cafe and a counter in it too. And, we'd be in there having milkshakes and coffee and the sweet stuff too. So just, I really got to see, besides the city of Seattle and the suburban upbringing, I got to see what he really cherished was the rural upbringing, the rural life.
his father was a butcher, and he learned that trade as well. And so he set up his younger brother with this meat lockers business with a lunch counter, and they ground their own hamburger there. But I remember so often him and his brother Ozzy cutting up sides of beef and packaging them and stuff, man. He just, he liked that kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Value Mart and the bowling alley, because anytime Mom was busy and wasn't there to make dinner, it was bonus for us, because he would take us out for a cheeseburger and a milkshake, and I think he liked it more than we did, but it was always a big treat. Yeah.
My name's Sam. I'm Ray's husband of 54 years nearly now, and like I've always said, Orv was my hero, and he would share things with me. But one thing, if you could take one thing away today that he told me, was he was given that task. Looked impossible to go up that hill with Paul and the other two guys. And I'd been there, and it's just like that. It's all rock. And you've got 5 German machine guns shooting down at you, and artillery from about 2 miles away coming in. But when he was given that task the night before, by that time, every other junior officer had already been killed or wounded. He was the last one. It was beyond tough.
When he got to be captain, I remember him saying, one of the guys said, well, how did you get that rank? And he said, I, through attrition, became captain.
Yeah.
Right.
Through attrition.
Yeah.
Sam,
People were
I-
killed.
the crowd.
That's
Oh,
all.
I've heard that one.
I also wanted to share that with my dad retiring when I was 7, I got to go on a lot of good trips with my parents. And one specifically was in 1977. We drove back east, all the way back east. We went to Washington, D.C., and we did go down to South Carolina, and we attended the reunion of his 338th Infantry Division, 338th Infantry Regiment from World War II reunion. So that was really cool that I got to experience that. And one final story that's important to me, that really means a lot to me, is that I still play trumpet to this day. And I had this just beater trumpet in 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, and the thing was just beat up. And I wanted to get a new trumpet really bad. And he said, you know, you got to show me though. You got to show me that you're going to commit to this thing, and that you're going to really do this. And then I'll get you a new trumpet. And okay. So I worked hard at it, and I ended up right before Christmas in 8th grade. I became first chair, and I had been second to last chair in 7th grade. I just decided I'm going to do this, and I can do this. So I worked my way all the way up, and I got first chair, and it was just great. And so then our band director, Ben Gary, said to my dad, well, I know this music instructor at Shoreline Community College. His name's Dave Earling, who went on to become the mayor of Edmonds, by the way. And he said, I'm going to have Mr. Earling meet you and David at Kennelly Keys at Ballinger and look at some trumpets. And my dad, that's great. That's really helpful. And so we're driving up there. This is like right before Christmas in 1976. We're driving up there, and he just gives me that stern look of, you know, we're just looking tonight. We're just looking. And I just thought, okay, yeah, no expectations. We get in there. Mr. Earling takes out a Bach Model 37 Stradivarius trumpet, which is the creme de la creme, top of the line trumpet. Tries the thing out, goes, this thing plays great. It's got a great bore. I recommend this horn. And I just thought, there's just no way. There's just no way. Well, my dad, he looks down at the case, because Earling had put it back in the case. He picks it up, takes it up to the cashier and puts it up on the counter, and he says, how much for this horn? This is 1976. And the clerk says, well, it's $450. And I thought, no way. There's just no way. And he goes, well, I tell you what, does that thing have a guarantee on it? And the young guy working the register, he kind of looks up and he goes, it's a musical instrument, you know, it's like bulletproof. You know, he didn't say that, but, you know, he kind of gave that look. And my dad goes, I want a 1-year guarantee. And so
You got the 1-year guarantee?
No,
the
are
guy,
you serious?
the guy said, okay, fine, I'll give you a 1-year guarantee. And my dad said, fine, write me up. Here's a receipt for that trumpet from 1976. And it's got, and then after the salesman wrote it all up, my dad wrote on the bottom in his ink, 1-year guarantee. I walked out of that store carrying that trumpet in that case, and I was on cloud 9.
Are you still using it?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
I'm playing a different trumpet these days, but I still have the Bach Model 37. All right.
It's a good story.
Thank you.
I want to thank the Bloch children especially. Thank you all for coming out. You highlight something that I first learned with our other special guest, and if you haven't met him yet, we have Desmond Doss Jr. in the crowd, and his dad was the angel or hero of Hacksaw Ridge in World War II during the Battle of Okinawa.
Amen.
And something I learned with him is that as extraordinary as the thing these guys did, when they went home, they were dad. They were a brother. They were an uncle, a cousin. And that's what I hope everyone takes away from this, is that, yes, they did these amazing things, but they were still dad. And they still had that role to fulfill. And I've heard multiple of them tell me that, you know, I've talked to a couple now, and then one of them was Bruce Crandall, and he said, as great as what I did was, I was still prouder to be a dad and alive than somewhere else.
Yeah.
So from here, again, thank you very much. From here, we're actually going to go to a place where we're actually going to park and start walking the entire rest of the tour. We have 4 more recipients to go. Hope you're with us. Thank you for staying on with the live stream, and we'll see you down